What if I told you cavemen didn't just huddle in caves, waiting for the Ice Age to end? They engineered bone cities, stitched clothes with microscopic precision, and even built trade highways across frozen continents. The last Ice Age wasn't just a story of survival against impossible odds. It was the crucible where humans unlocked fire mastery, invented tailored fashion, forged alliances through love and gifts, and turned a frozen planet into their testing ground. This is how our ancestors really lived and thrived at the edge of extinction. The last glacial maximum, a planet transformed. Think about a world where New York City was 2 miles below a thick layer of ice. Back about 25,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, that's how things were. A lot of northern Europe and half of North America were buried under ice sheets that were higher than mountain ranges. The world's sea levels dropped about 120 meters, making land bridges between countries visible. The places we now call islands, like Britain, Japan, and Indonesia, used to be connected to the continent. Earth itself seemed like a different world. The air was colder, drier, and full of dust. Ice cores drilled from Greenland reveal that average temperatures in Europe were about 15 degrees Celsius lower than today. Imagine Paris with the climate of Siberia. Deserts expanded across Africa, while rainforests like the Amazon shrank into patches of grassland. This wasn't just cold, it was global chaos. The amazing thing is that life did not just disappear, it changed its position. There wasn't just snow in Siberia, there was a mammoth steppe. This wasn't empty land, it was a super grassland with more animal life than the Serengeti in Africa today. There were lots of horses, bison, giant rhinoceroses, and mammoths on the fields. Because there were so many animals to eat, it was not only possible for people to survive, but it was also common. Dale Guthrie, a paleontologist, even found that the mammoth steppe had 10 times more animal mass in 1 square kilometer than the Serengeti does now. The cold created new opportunities. Lower sea levels revealed a giant landmass in the north, Beringia, connecting Siberia to Alaska. Instead of a narrow ice bridge, it was a grassland larger than modern Texas, supporting herds of reindeer and mammoths. Genetic studies of indigenous Americans show their ancestors lived in Beringia for thousands of years, not just passing through. This hidden continent became a waiting room for one of humanity's greatest migrations. Elsewhere, the transformation was equally dramatic. The Sahara, usually pictured as endless sand, turned into a green savanna dotted with lakes. Sediment studies show hippos, crocodiles, and antelope once lived there during cooler Ice Age periods. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean shoreline stretched much farther out, and what we know as the English Channel was a wide plain where people could walk from France to Britain. In a sense, geography during the Ice Age was far more interconnected than today. Scientists studying pollen records from ancient soils discovered that forests retreated to tiny pockets called refugia. These islands of green in Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans became safe havens for plants, animals, and humans alike. Modern Europeans still carry genetic traces from these refugia. Without them, much of Europe's population might have gone extinct. Archaeology gives it a new perspective. Instead of the bones of hungry cavemen, Ice Age sites show groups that were doing very well. Even during the worst of the freeze, people in Czechia were carving figures out of clay. In Russia, huge homes were made from the bones of mammoths. At Sungir, a grave showed a man who was covered in 3,000 ivory beads, each of which took an hour to cut. It's clear that the need to survive gave people time for art, fashion, and even status markers. One overlooked detail is light. With sea levels low, the Earth's surface reflected sunlight differently. Climate scientists argue this increased the number of clear sky days in high latitudes. Summers brought long stretches of continuous daylight. Combined with relatively dry winters, it created conditions perfect for grazing animals, and therefore humans who depended on them. This explains why people could live as far north as the Yana River at 71 degrees latitude, thousands of years before modern Arctic explorers. Yes, the last glacial maximum was hard, but it was also a time when new things were invented. People learned how to make custom clothes, improved composite tools, and set up trade networks that stretched across huge distances. Instead of holding to life, the evidence shows that people were turning problems into opportunities. The needle that changed humanity. People often picture thick animal skins thrown over their shoulders when they think of how people survived in the Ice Age. But in -40 degrees, loose hides can only go so far. Cracks let wind through, snow piles up, and kids are the first to freeze. It wasn't fire or guns that really changed the game. The eyed sewing needle was so small that you could carry it in your pocket. Archaeologists have uncovered bone needles at Denisova Cave in Siberia, dating back nearly 50,000 years. That's older than many cave paintings and older than bows and arrows. These early needles were carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, polished smooth and drilled with tiny eyes. They look delicate, yet they carry the weight of survival. With them, humans could stitch furs into fitted clothes that trapped heat far better than rough hides. What makes this discovery fascinating is the level of specialization. By 35,000 years ago, different kinds of needles existed. Thick ones carved from mammoth ivory were used for heavy winter parkas. Slim swan bone needles made fine seams for underlayers. Tiny rabbit bone needles, no thicker than a toothpick, produced decorative stitching and fur trim. In Wyoming, a site called La Prelle revealed fragments of 32 different needles, each made from a different animal. It was an entire Ice Age toolkit of sewing instruments. Why did this matter so much? Because cold kills fast. Modern scientists like Dr. Ian Gilligan of the University of Sydney argue bluntly, without the needle, humans could never have lived north of Portland, Oregon. That includes much of Europe, Siberia, and Beringia. Tailored clothes meant survival zones expanded dramatically. Suddenly, entire continents opened up to human occupation. These clothes are just as remarkable in how they are put together. In Russia, thousands of ivory beads made into designs were found in the grave of a man from 28,000 years ago at Sungir. His outfit, when put back together, looked like a fur jacket with boots, pants, and a cape. It took about an hour to cut each bead, which means that just the decoration took years of work. This wasn't just useful gear, it was also a way to show off your style, personality, and position. One little-known fact concerns the science of fur itself. Reindeer hair is hollow, trapping air inside like fiberglass insulation. A reindeer parka weighs only 5 pounds but keeps heat better than a 20-pound wool coat. Wolverines provided another hidden advantage. Their fur resists frosting. Unlike wolf or dog fur, it doesn't collect ice from breath, making it the perfect trim for hoods. Even today, Arctic explorers prize wolverine fur for this reason. Ice Age people discovered it first. Clothing wasn't just stitched together, it was engineered. At some sites, seams were waterproofed with pine pitch mixed with charcoal. Layering systems were developed that sound identical to modern outdoor gear. A soft inner layer to wick moisture, a thick insulating middle, and a windproof outer shell. Instead of nylon or polyester, they used bird skins, hair pelts, and wolf hides. Instead of Gore-Tex, they used carefully treated sinew thread and natural resins. There's also evidence of selective breeding. Archaeologists studying preserved pelts from permafrost sites have noticed that Ice Age people didn't just use whatever they could catch. They seemed to favor animals with certain fur qualities: thicker guard hairs, softer underfur, or better resistance to water. Some researchers even suggest humans may have loosely managed herds or habitats to encourage desirable traits. That's not far from the earliest stages of domestication. Children's clothing gives us another glimpse. In Siberian burials, tiny parkas made from ground squirrel pelts have been found, sewn with the same care as adult garments. A single child's coat might require 30 separate pelts, each cut and stitched to maximize insulation while allowing movement. That level of detail shows survival wasn't left to chance. Parents invested enormous effort to ensure the young could endure winters. Microbiology gives us something we didn't see coming. Studies of old fur layers showed that they got good bacteria over time, like how skin has live environments. Some bacteria may have helped keep the temperature stable, and even kept people from getting sick. Ice Age clothing wasn't just made of dead materials. It became part of the body's defenses, like a second skin full of living things that helped it. Mammoth bone cities, architecture of survival. In Ukraine during the Ice Age, there wasn't much wood on the flat, treeless lands, and winters were very harsh. Archaeologists have found something truly amazing though: houses built entirely from the bones of mammoths. These weren't just shacks. They were carefully planned structures that show how creative our ancestors were. At Mezirich, excavations uncovered 4 circular structures dating back around 15,000 years. Each was made from hundreds of mammoth bones, skulls stacked into walls, jawbones fitted like bricks, tusks planted into the ground like giant beams. One house used the remains of at least 149 mammoths. That is not random scavenging, that is architecture. The choice of bones was deliberate. Skulls and pelvises, wide and flat, formed strong bases. Long leg bones became rafters, while shoulder blades overlapped like shingles. Tusks sometimes showed signs of heating and bending, proving Ice Age builders understood how to change the shape of ivory without breaking it. Some bones even displayed drilled holes, suggesting they were lashed together with rope or sinew. These people weren't just piling bones, they were following design principles we still use today: weight distribution, insulation, and anchoring. Why use bone at all? The usual answer is no wood, but there's more. Bone is naturally water resistant and heavier than wood, meaning it holds heat better once packed with hides and soil. Its hollow cavities trapped air, adding insulation. Studies of microclimates inside these shelters suggest the temperature could stay 40 degrees Celsius warmer than outside. Imagine -50 outside, yet close to room temperature inside with only modest fire use. Inside the houses, zones were organized with purpose. Archaeologists found hearths near light sources, workspaces for tools, and pits dug into frozen ground to store food. Furs lined sleeping areas. One mammoth skull at Mezin was painted with red geometric designs and used as a drum, proof that art and ritual were built directly into the home. At Kostenki and other sites, some bone circles were so large they probably weren't homes at all, but gathering places, like prehistoric community halls. Evidence of large-scale burning in certain bone rings suggests they were used for rituals or feasts, not daily life. This flips the old idea of cavemen hiding in cracks of rock. These were open country engineers building monuments that lasted centuries. The practicalities are hard to understand. One mammoth head can be more than 100 kilograms heavy. Since there were no wheels or pull animals, dozens of people had to work together to move, lift, and drag each piece. The work needed a lot of planning and teamwork from more than one family. These houses show that people in the Ice Age lived in groups that were more like towns than like roaming bands. One detail often overlooked is how long these structures were used. Layers of rebuilding at the same sites show families passed them down through generations, repairing and enlarging them as needed. That suggests a sense of ownership and tradition. People weren't just surviving season to season. They were building homes meant to last. But the symbols in this story may be what makes it most powerful. Picture yourself inside the ribs of the most famous animal from the Ice Age. Mammoths stood for strength, danger, and plenty. Not only might it have been useful to sleep inside their bones, but it was also a statement. We have defeated the beast, we live inside it. Anthropologists say that this could have been for both psychological and spiritual reasons, using shared symbols to bring people together. Recent studies even suggest that bone structures could have been tuned for sound. Painted skulls at Mezin resonate like drums when struck. Combined with rattles and flutes, homes themselves may have become instruments during rituals. The architecture of survival doubled as the architecture of ceremony. Modern architects study these bone houses for lessons in sustainable design. Built without metal or machines, they lasted thousands of years and offered insulation superior to many early wooden huts. They used recycled material, were adapted to local conditions, and required community teamwork. In a way, they were the green architecture of their age. Masters of fire in a frozen world. Today it's so easy to make fire. We just flick a lighter or press a button and flames appear. During the Ice Age, fire did more than just heat and light things. It was a mix of science, engineering, and community life. And the fact that people used it in the coldest times shows that they were very good at coming up with new ideas. Archaeological evidence from sites like Cavemen 9 in Ukraine shows that Ice Age fires weren't random piles of burning wood. 3 different hearths were found side by side, one large for cooking and warmth, one medium for heating stone tools, and one small for craft work that needed precise control. Each hearth burned at carefully regulated temperatures, some reaching over 600 degrees Celsius. These people understood heat in the same way a modern blacksmith does, as a tool to be adjusted for each task. The problem was fuel. The mammoth steppe had very little wood. Small shrubs like dwarf willow and Arctic birch grew there, but not enough to support daily fires. Instead, humans turned to unusual fuels. Burned bone fragments found at Kostenki show temperatures higher than any wood fire. To achieve this, bones had to be dried, cracked, and placed in a draft that worked like a bellows. The marrow inside burned hot and long, almost like charcoal. It was controlled combustion, not just tossing bones into flames. Then big lamps showed up. Think of a cut stone bowl full of animal fat and a strip of moss that serves as a wick. When you lit it, it had a steady light that wouldn't smoke for hours. These lamps gave Arctic caves soft, steady light during the months when it was dark. Besides that, they were also heaters. A small lamp could keep a small room warm enough to stay alive. New tests show that they can burn for days without getting more fuel. In the Ice Age, that meant safety, warmth, and light all in one thing. Dung was another surprising fuel. Reindeer droppings dried into pellets that burned steadily, useful for cooking and for slow, controlled fires. What looks like waste today was a life-saving resource in a frozen land where every calorie and every stick mattered. Cooking methods also evolved with fire. In Siberia, archaeologists found evidence of hot stone cooking, stones heated in fire and then dropped into pits of water lined with hide. The water boiled without a pot, allowing people to cook roots, grains, and meat without wasting fuel. This system left little smoke, reducing the risk of attracting predators or rival groups. It was efficient and stealthy, a survival strategy hidden in technique. Another overlooked technology was heat storage. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, ceramic balls were fired in hearths until glowing red. Once heated, they continued to radiate warmth for hours after the fire died down. Families could place them under sleeping furs or around workspaces. It was one of humanity's earliest uses of thermal engineering. But fire was never only practical, it was social. The hearth was the center of every dwelling. People gathered there to eat, tell stories, and pass down knowledge. Anthropologists call it the first social network. Songs, myths, and instructions on hunting routes were memorized by firelight. Without writing, the firelight was the classroom. Children learned fire skills almost from infancy. Tiny fire-starting kits have been found in some burials. Miniature flints and tinder fungus given to youngsters as training tools. To fail at making fire meant death, so the skill was passed down carefully, generation after generation. There is a story in the fact that there is no fire. Hearths are less common during the coldest ages of the last glacial maximum. People didn't give up though. It seems to say that their homes and clothes were so well made that they didn't always need to be heated. Individual hearths were replaced by fires that many families shared. This saved fuel and made people closer, making warmth a resource that everyone could use. Hunting the impossible, strategy, not strength. It's exciting to think of hunters in furs following mammoths with spears, but it's also not true. No arm could throw a spear deep enough to go through 4 inches of thick hide and fat and then get to the important parts. Being patient, planning ahead, and understanding how things work were more important during the Ice Age. Archaeologists studying Clovis points in North America realized many weren't meant for throwing at all. They were fixed to heavy pikes planted in the ground. Hunters lured animals into narrow valleys or snowy bottlenecks, forcing the massive creatures to charge. The mammoth's own weight drove the spear deeper than any throw could. It was like turning the animal's momentum against itself, a deadly trick of engineering. Other weapons used clever leverage. Around 30,000 years ago, hunters invented the atlatl, or spear thrower. This simple wooden lever acted like an extension of the arm, multiplying throwing power by 4 times. Modern tests show atlatls can send darts flying at 150 kilometers per hour, strong enough to puncture elephant hide at 40 meters. The later invention of bows made hunting even more precise, but these early throwers were the real revolution. But the real genius was knowing the prey. Reindeer migrated along the same paths every year. Hunters built ambushes at river crossings, waiting weeks for the herds. Archaeological sites like Pansevant in France reveal layers of reindeer bones stacked year after year in the same spots. It was not chaos. It was scheduling. Humans turned animal migrations into calendars. Camouflage played a role too. At Starcar in England, 11,000 years ago, hunters wore headdresses made from deer skulls, complete with antlers. To a herd of red deer, these disguised hunters looked like other deer moving in slowly. That gave them a few extra seconds to strike. In the Ice Age, a few seconds meant survival. Sound tricks added another layer. Small instruments made of bone, shaped like whistles, may have been used as decoys to mimic reindeer calls. Noisemakers were also used to panic horses into running toward waiting hunters. In some sites, archaeologists found rows of carefully placed posts, possibly fences guiding herds into traps. Instead of charging head-on, hunters made animals move themselves into danger. Persistence hunting, chasing animals until they collapsed, was another technique. Humans cannot outrun reindeer in speed, but they can outlast them in distance. A band of hunters working in shifts could pursue a wounded animal across snow for days until exhaustion dropped it. In Africa today, some hunters still use this method on antelope. During the Ice Age, snow revealed tracks, making long pursuits possible even in whiteout conditions. One unique feature comes from the tiny wear on the points of weapons. Some Clovis spear tips have cracks that look like they were caused by very strong impacts, while others are smooth. Birds were hit with these weapons that had blunt tips and stunned them instead of cutting them. Hunters in the Ice Age made different kinds of bullets for different kinds of targets, like thin points for reindeer, heavy points for mammoths, and barbed points for fish. This shows a higher level of skill than most people think. Not every kill was great. German archaeologists found wooden spears from 400,000 years ago that looked a lot like modern javelins. When tried by Olympic athletes, they flew more than 70 meters straight. These were perfect for pets that were about the size of horses and deer. Size wasn't important for success, constancy was. Families could eat without having to worry about mammoths because there was a steady supply of smaller food. Hunting also required teamwork. Studies of kill sites show butchery was organized. Different people specialized in skinning, cutting tendons, or breaking bones for marrow. One group could not do it alone. Taking apart a mammoth required dozens of hands. The hunt was not just a test of weapons, but a test of community coordination. The real staple? Reindeer, not mammoth. When most people think of Ice Age hunters, they picture them with spears pointed at mammoths. Mammoth hunts did happen, but they were rare and dangerous. The simple reindeer, not the huge giant, was what kept people alive during the Ice Age. Reindeer were killed more often, used in more ways, and supplied resources other than food, according to archaeology. At sites like Grubgraben in Austria and Pinsevant in France, reindeer bones dominate the record. Sometimes 90% of animal remains in a camp are reindeer. This is no accident. Reindeer moved in predictable migrations, crossing rivers and valleys at the same time every year. Hunters could wait at choke points, certain that herds would appear. A mammoth might give huge rewards, but it was unpredictable. Reindeer were the calendar animals of the Ice Age. The usefulness of reindeer went far beyond meat. Their hides were critical for clothing. Unlike many animals, reindeer develop a dense winter coat with hollow hairs. Each strand acts like a tiny thermos, trapping air and holding heat. A reindeer parka was lighter and warmer than multiple layers of other furs. Archaeologists examining human burials in Siberia have reconstructed outfits made entirely from reindeer pelts, stitched with sinew thread. These weren't scraps thrown together, but carefully tailored suits capable of resisting Arctic blizzards. Young reindeer were especially prized. Calves and yearlings grew the softest fur, with higher insulation value than adults. Hunters timed their hunts carefully, targeting herds in late autumn, when coats were at their thickest but before shedding began in spring. The narrow 6-week window of prime fur became a crucial season for survival planning. Every part of the animal had a use. Tendons were split into sinew threads, stronger than modern nylon fishing line. Antlers were carved into spear tips, needles, and hooks. Bones were shaped into scrapers for hides. Even the stomachs of reindeer were used as containers. Early waterproof bags for carrying fat or water. Ethnographic parallels with modern Sami and Inuit cultures show just how versatile reindeer parts are. The same lessons likely applied in the Ice Age. Food storage is an important feature that is often missed. Reindeer meat could be sliced up and dried in the cold air to make jerky that would last for months. Grease was made from fat and kept in bone or hide cases. It was used to power lamps or smeared on clothes to keep them dry. Archaeologists have found storage pits lined with reindeer bones and hides at Ice Age campsites. This shows that families were getting ready for the winter by putting together supplies. Hunting reindeer also played a big part in their social lives. Butchery sites show that hunters, people who made tools, and people who sew all worked together. The economy is amazing. The bones show patterns of skilled cuts that get rid of as much meat as possible with as little waste as possible. Some reindeer heads have holes made in them, which could be for religious reasons or to help young hunters practice shooting. Instead of just staying alive, hunting reindeer was a way to learn, practice, and be part of a society. What makes the story richer is how humans thought about these animals. Cave paintings at places like Lascaux and Font de Gaume show reindeer in seasonal detail, antlers drawn in autumn velvet, pregnant females in spring. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were field notes, reminders of when and where herds could be found. Hunters weren't chasing blindly, they were following information systems recorded in art. Genetic proof also has a story to tell. Remains of people from Europe during the Ice Age show that they ate a lot of protein and fat from reindeer. Isotope tests show that for many groups, reindeer provided more calories than all the other animals put together. Mammoths may be the stuff of legends, but in real life, reindeer were the North's main source of food. Reindeer also helped people bond over long distances. Through trade, antlers and leather went hundreds of kilometers. In some graves, you can find jewelry made from cut reindeer bones, as well as beads from the Mediterranean and Baltic amber. These things show that reindeer supplies were not only useful, but also symbolic. They were used to show who you were and to trade goods. The forgotten harvest: plants, roots, and medicines. Most people think of meat when they think of food from the Ice Age, like giant steaks sizzling over fires or strips of dried reindeer. Archaeological evidence, on the other hand, says something different. Along with bones and tools, scientists have found proof that plants, roots, and even medicines were much more important for life than we thought. The proof comes from an unlikely place: ancient teeth. Dental plaque, hardened into tartar, traps tiny fragments of food. When researchers scraped the teeth of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, they discovered microscopic plant starches and pollen grains. Some were from cattail roots, wild carrots, and hawthorn berries. Others belonged to plants with medicinal qualities, like chamomile and yarrow. These weren't accidents. People chewed them on purpose. Plant use wasn't casual nibbling. At sites such as Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists uncovered grinding stones weighing over 20 kilograms. Microscopic analysis revealed they were used to crush seeds, roots, and tubers into flour. Cooking that flour transformed tough starches into digestible food. It was a quiet but powerful innovation, bread-like meals long before farming began. Why did this matter so much? Because the human brain runs on glucose. Meat supplies protein and fat, but plants deliver carbohydrates, quick-burning fuel that keeps hunters alert and children energetic. Ice Age brains consumed up to 20% of daily calories. Without starch-rich plants, mental sharpness might have faltered, and survival strategies could have collapsed. Some plants also offered medical benefits. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, 50,000-year-old Neanderthal remains contain traces of bitter plants with no food value, like yarrow. These likely served as natural remedies for inflammation or stomach problems. Another site revealed poplar bark in dental plaque, a source of salicylic acid, the same compound found in aspirin today. It seems Ice Age people weren't just foragers, they were pharmacists experimenting with nature's cabinet. Roots and tubers were especially valuable. Buried deep underground, they remained accessible even in harsh winters when other foods vanished. Modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania dig for tubers year-round, guided by the memory of elders who know where each species grows. Archaeologists believe Ice Age people had similar encyclopedic plant knowledge. Grandmothers and older women, no longer hunting, may have specialized in passing down this wisdom. Cattail, a plant that grows near lakes and swamps, was another food that people forgot about. You can eat the plant stems, pollen, and young shoots. In Europe during the Ice Age, where marshes were common, cattail would have been a reliable food source. There could be flour, veggies, and even fibers for weaving on one stand. In hard times, this simple plant could mean the difference between going hungry and staying alive for a family. Plant collecting had something to do with technology too. Eurasia sites with grinding stones, fire pits, and pieces of clay showed that people didn't just eat plants raw. They were being roasted, boiled with hot stones, and left to ferment. Fiber-rich foods became softer and easier to chew when they were cooked, which released extra calories. This was also important for oral health, since raw roots hurt teeth more than cooked ones. Storage practices show further sophistication. Seeds were dried and kept in pits lined with hides or bark. Some were strung together in clusters, like primitive granaries. This foresight turned fragile resources into year-round insurance. Cultural meaning was woven in too. Some Ice Age figurines carved from ivory or bone show women holding bulging bellies or baskets. Scholars think these may symbolize fertility and food gathering, a reminder that plants, not just hunts, kept groups alive. The biggest surprise is scale. At Ohalo 2 in Israel, a 23,000-year-old site preserved under lake mud, archaeologists found over 140 different plant species stored and processed by hunter-gatherers. This wasn't last-minute foraging. It was systematic plant management thousands of years before farming. Together, these findings bust the old idea of the meat-only caveman. During the Ice Age, plants were just as important for life as animals. Herbs provided medicine, tubers provided steady energy, and seeds stored food for a long time. People passed down their knowledge of plants with the same care they used to pass down their knowledge of stone tools. Fishing the Ice Age seas. People have seen the ocean as a barrier for a long time because it is cold, dangerous, and hard to predict. There was less fresh water during the Ice Age, and herds became less dependable. However, many groups found a different truth. The sea was a food bank that never closed. Archaeology has shown that fishing wasn't just a hobby, it was a way for whole groups to stay alive. The most striking evidence comes from sites along the Mediterranean. At Cueva de Nerja in Spain, layers of shells, fish bones, and seal remains show people returning season after season. The pattern of bones is especially revealing. About 80% came from species that spawn in spring, meaning Ice Age fishers understood migration cycles. They weren't just grabbing what washed ashore, they knew when schools would arrive and planned their year around it. Tools tell the same story. In southern France and coastal Spain, archaeologists have found barbed bone harpoons, curved fish hooks carved from antler, and small stone weights used for nets. Some of the hooks are over 16,000 years old, and their barbs are angled so precisely that even modern anglers recognize them as expert designs. These were not crude experiments. They were tested technologies passed down through generations. Nets may have been one of the biggest breakthroughs. A single person with a hook could catch a fish, but a coordinated group with a net could capture hundreds at once. Standard-sized net weights found at coastal sites suggest communities shared knowledge about net making, perhaps even trading them as specialized tools. In one sense, this was Ice Age industrial fishing. It had a huge effect on nutrition. Isotope studies of bones from people who lived near the coast of Europe show that for some groups, marine protein made up as much as half of their food. Fish had omega-3 fatty acids that are good for the brain, mussels had minerals like zinc and iodine, and seaweed had fiber and vitamins that are hard to find in diets that are heavy on meat. You could get food and medicine from the ocean. Some fishing feats border on unbelievable. On Japan's Natsushima Island, archaeologists discovered 9,000-year-old tuna bones. Tuna do not swim close to shore. They require deep water fishing and boats strong enough to handle them. This proves Ice Age people were already venturing far from land, navigating currents, and coordinating large hunts on open water. That level of skill rivals Polynesian seafarers of much later eras. Even more unexpected is proof from the Channel Islands in California. Some of the oldest shell fishhooks in the world, dating back 13,000 years, were found at Daisy Cave. The islands have never been linked to the mainland. To get there, people had to build ships that could handle the water, load them with goods, and sail across kilometers of open ocean on purpose. These weren't just drifters by chance. They were the first people to live on the water. Fishing also changed social structures. Coastal sites often show steadier diets compared to inland ones. While hunters faced feast or famine cycles tied to reindeer migrations or mammoth kills, fishers could harvest shellfish year-round. This reliability allowed coastal groups to grow larger, stay in one place longer, and experiment with new technologies. It may even explain why pottery first appeared in Japan around 16,000 years ago, perfect for boiling fish stews. The sea also shaped culture. At Cosca Cave in France, now submerged under the Mediterranean, Ice Age artists painted not just horses and bison, but seals, fish, and even jellyfish. These images suggest the sea wasn't just food. It was part of the imagination and mythology of the people who depended on it. It's simple to forget that the coasts looked very different during the last glacial maximum. When the sea level was 120 meters lower, beaches went out far beyond the shoreline we see now. These beaches exposed tide flats that were full of mussels, clams, and crabs. It was possible to harvest whole continental shelves. Families in the Ice Age made the most of the ocean buffet, which went on farther than current maps can show. This maritime turn may have saved humanity more than once. Some scholars argue that when inland resources collapsed, coastal populations kept going because the sea offered a steady fallback. In South Africa, for example, shellfish gathering 160,000 years ago coincided with a glacial period that devastated inland ecosystems. The ocean gave humans a safety net when land failed. In movies, hunters may be shown chasing mammoths, but in real life, many Ice Age families fished. They set hooks made from bone, cast nets heavy with stones, fished for shellfish at low tide, and even went out into the open sea to catch tuna. These were not timid experimenters. They were experts at living in the sea, and their survival relied on both migrations and tides. Bands of Survival, the 30-person blueprint. When we think of survival, we often picture a hunter by himself with a stick. But surviving in the Ice Age wasn't just about one person. It was about the band, which is made up of about 25 to 30 close friends. This number keeps coming up in anthropology and geology, and it wasn't a coincidence. It was the size that nature made us for. Why 30? It's large enough to include a mix of skills: hunters, toolmakers, seamstresses, elders, and children, yet small enough that everyone knows everyone else. In such groups, gossip and reputation mattered more than rules or chiefs. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers, like the Hadza of Tanzania, find almost identical numbers in their camps. The Ice Age blueprint still shapes us today. Archaeological sites reveal how these groups worked. At Pansevant in France, butchering areas around hearths show reindeer meat distributed evenly across households. No single family hoarded the kill. Sharing wasn't generosity, it was math. A hunter alone might succeed one day in 20. A band of 30 pooling food had a 19 in 20 chance of eating daily. In brutal climates, cooperation was the only insurance policy. Leadership was flexible. There were no kings of the Ice Age. Authority shifted with context. The best tracker led the hunt, the best seamstress organized clothing production, the elder with the deepest memory guided migration routes. This situational leadership prevented domination and kept peace in small groups where grudges could be deadly. Burial sites reinforce this. Grave goods are often evenly distributed, with children and adults alike receiving ornaments and ochre. There are no signs of wealthy elites towering over the poor. There was, of course, conflict. However, fighting wasn't the answer. Anthropologists who study modern bands have found that disagreements are often settled with laughter, stories, or pressure from the group. Someone who is being selfish could be made fun of or teased until they get in line. If things got too heated, the group would split up for a season and then come back together when things calmed down. Archaeological evidence of camps that were lived in, left empty, and then returned to shows that this fission and fusion rhythm was already present during the Ice Age. What's remarkable is how inclusive these groups were. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal with severe disabilities lived for years, long after he could no longer hunt. Someone fed and protected him. At Sungir in Russia, a child with congenital illness was buried with thousands of ivory beads, treated with the same honor as healthy hunters. Weakness did not mean rejection. Care was part of the survival strategy. Children grew up immersed in this collective life. They learned by watching and doing, often playing with miniature tools, tiny fire-making kits, small scrapers, or child-sized bows found in burials. These weren't toys for fun, but practice sets for mastering adult skills. By their teens, Ice Age children were already skilled contributors. Elders played a different role. They remembered where roots grew in dry years, how rivers shifted, or which valleys held snow the longest. This kind of map-in-the-mind knowledge took decades to build. Without writing, memory was the most valuable survival tool, and the band depended on its oldest members to carry it. Emotion bound these groups together as tightly as food. Around fires, people sang, laughed, and told stories. Songs encoded roots and myths, while jokes kept egos in check. Grief rituals honored the dead, easing pain without tearing the group apart. In a world where predators hunted in packs and frostbite could kill in hours, human survival demanded emotional cooperation just as much as physical effort. Even genes show how important the band is. Inbreeding can happen in small groups, but people in the Ice Age avoided this by having large networks of marriage. Beads and ornaments were like ID cards that showed which group you were in. Young adults could meet partners from other bands at seasonal get-togethers, which kept families healthy. The Band of 30 became humanity's survival machine, small enough to stay mobile, large enough to pool skills, and bonded by trust. Modern science shows our brains are still wired for this. Psychologist Robin Dunbar's Dunbar number suggests humans can only maintain close relationships with about 150 people, with the deepest trust limited to 15-30. That matches Ice Age groups almost perfectly. Grandmothers, humanity's secret weapon. In most animals, females lose their importance in the group when they can't have babies anymore. But people are not like that. Women can go on living for decades after menopause. During the Ice Age, this unusual trait may have meant the difference between life and extinction. Grandmothers weren't just extra people to feed. They were the key to survival in the Ice Age. Archaeologists at Ohala II in Israel found grinding stones from 23,000 years ago with residues of over 140 different plant species. Knowing which plants were edible, which needed cooking, and which were poisonous required years of learning. Elders carried this library of knowledge in their heads. Younger women busy with babies and men away hunting couldn't track every season or route. Grandmothers filled the gap. The grandmother hypothesis, supported by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes, explains why humans evolved long lifespans after fertility ended. Children of women with living grandmothers were far more likely to survive. Studies of the Hadza hunter-gatherers today prove it. Kids with grandmothers gathering tubers are healthier and better fed. Apply that to Ice Age bands and the advantage is obvious. Groups that supported their elders passed through famines with higher survival. Evidence from burials reinforces this. At Sungir in Russia, a 34,000-year-old cemetery contained not only children and strong hunters, but an older woman, toothless and arthritic, buried with care and red ochre. She was valued, even though she could no longer chase prey. Her survival meant wisdom survived. Medical knowledge likely rested in elder hands too. Neanderthal dental plaque has revealed traces of chamomile, bitter but useful for inflammation, and poplar bark, which contains salicylic acid, nature's aspirin. Such remedies aren't discovered by accident. They are passed down, tested, remembered. In a world without doctors, grandmothers were pharmacists. Grandmothers also acted as teachers of craft. The oldest sewing needles and weaving impressions often come from sites with multiple generations. Passing down how to make waterproof seams, twist fibers, or decorate garments with beads required patience and experience. Elders had the time to teach, while younger adults hunted or cared for infants. A grandmother's skill with a needle might have saved more lives than any spear. Another role was conflict management. In a small group of 30, tempers flared easily. Modern studies of forager bands show elders are often the peacemakers, stepping in with humor, wisdom, or stories that diffuse tension. Ice Age stories may have carried hidden survival lessons wrapped in entertainment. Elders used narrative to remind the group of dangers, warn against greed, and reinforce cooperation. But perhaps the most powerful contribution was childcare. Human children have the longest dependency of any species, often needing a decade before they can contribute fully. Mothers were frequently pregnant or nursing, and fathers were away hunting. Grandmothers provided food, supervision, and teaching for grandchildren. This freed younger women to reproduce more often, raising overall population survival. Genetic models show this support system gave humans a huge evolutionary edge. The influence extended beyond bloodlines. At Sungir, analysis suggests the older woman buried was not related to the nearby children genetically. She may have cared for them anyway. Cooperative child-rearing, alloparenting, extended family bonds beyond biology. That's uniquely human. No other primate shows this scale of caregiving across unrelated individuals. Symbolism in art supports this hidden role. Venus figurines, those small carvings of women, are sometimes depicted with features of older bodies, sagging skin, heavy frames. Far from being fertility icons only, they may have honored grandmothers as keepers of knowledge and stability. In quiet but important ways, grandmothers changed life in the Ice Age. They were not the hunters who killed mammoths or the seamstresses who worked by the fire to sew furs together. They were the ones who kept memories, healed, told stories, and watched over children. Because they were there, bands were able to move farther, make it through harsher winters, and raise more children to adults. Love across ice, marriage networks, and gifts. There weren't many ways to find love in a group of 25 to 30 people. Most of the young adults would be cousins or relatives, and they would have to work together to stay alive. How to solve it? There were marriage networks that went for hundreds of kilometers. People in the Ice Age didn't just love each other for personal reasons. They did it to stay alive. Strontium isotope analysis of Ice Age skeletons shows many individuals grew up in one region, but were buried in another, sometimes 200 kilometers away. This means people, especially women, left their birth groups to join distant bands. It wasn't wandering at random. These movements were systematic, part of a continent-wide web of alliances. Jewelry played a key role. Beads, pendants, and ornaments acted like Ice Age passports. At Pavlov Hills in Czechia, a woman was buried wearing beads carved in a style found 400 kilometers away. She likely carried them from her birthplace, a marker of her origin and identity. Amber from the Baltic, shells from the Mediterranean, and fox teeth from Siberia, all turned up far from their natural sources. These weren't trade items only. They were love tokens, dowries, and symbols of connection. Some gatherings acted like matchmaking festivals. At Pincevent in France, seasonal reindeer crossings brought hundreds of people together. Camps that usually held 30 swelled to 300 or more. Alongside butchery sites, archaeologists find ornaments, music instruments, and feasting remains. These weren't just hunting parties. They were opportunities for young adults to meet partners outside their bands, strengthening genetic diversity. Courtship rituals likely centered on gift exchange. A foxtooth pendant stained with red ochre, found in Lebanon and dated to 40,000 years ago, carries traces of skin oils, suggesting it was worn close to the body before being given away. Such gifts carried emotional weight and memory. They were personal, not just practical. In a world without writing, ornaments became love letters in stone, bone, and shell. Marriage wasn't simply about attraction, it was diplomacy. By exchanging partners, groups created webs of obligation and trust. If one band faced famine or conflict, in-laws elsewhere could offer shelter. This network reduced risk in a world where survival often hinged on unpredictable game and weather. Anthropologists call it exogamy, marrying outside the group. For Ice Age humans, it was as critical as fire or clothing. Genetic studies confirm its success. Despite small group sizes, Ice Age populations avoided heavy inbreeding. DNA from Sungir burials in Russia shows wide diversity, proving individuals regularly moved between groups. The children buried there carried ornaments from distant regions, proof that marriage networks carried not only genes, but also cultural ideas. Ornaments themselves had regional dialects. Bead styles clustered in certain areas, just like accents in language. By looking at a necklace, people could tell where someone came from. These styles acted as identity markers, helping travelers find allies and potential partners. The spread of these designs shows that marriage networks connected groups from Spain to Siberia. Love also left emotional traces. The Red Lady of El Mirón cave in Spain, buried 19,000 years ago, was covered in red ochre and surrounded by ornaments from multiple regions. Isotope analysis shows she grew up elsewhere but was laid to rest with great care by her adopted group. Someone carried her body, decorated it, and honored her with rituals. It wasn't survival alone. It was affection, belonging, and grief expressed through ceremony. There were many marriage networks that helped each other. New mates quickly spread new ideas by teaching each other things like how to make a better spear point, sew a waterproof seam, and find plants in the winter. The web of love was also a web of technology and ways to stay alive. Beringia, the lost subcontinent. Many times, when we hear the word land bridge, we picture a thin strip of frozen land where Asia and North America meet. But there was no bridge at all in Beringia, where the first Americans lived. From Siberia to Alaska, it was a huge subcontinent that was bigger than both Texas and California put together. During the Ice Age, when the sea level was 120 meters lower than it is now, this land was visible, and it wasn't covered in ice. It was one of the world's most productive places. Beringia was part of what scientists call the Mammoth Steppe, a grassland ecosystem covering millions of square kilometers. Instead of tundra, there were endless fields of dry grass, ideal for grazing herds of bison, horses, musk oxen, and woolly mammoths. Caribou migrated in enormous numbers, and predators like cave lions and dire wolves followed them. Far from being empty, Beringia was bursting with life, a frozen Serengeti at the top of the world. For humans, this was a land of opportunity. Genetic studies of indigenous American populations suggest their ancestors lived in Beringia for thousands of years, not just passing through. This period of Beringian standstill lasted so long that unique genetic lineages formed, which are still found in Native American DNA today. It means entire generations were born, lived, and died in this subcontinent, calling it home. Archaeological finds, though sparse due to permafrost, hint at how people thrived there. Mammoth bones shaped into dwellings, reindeer hide clothing stitched with fine needles, and stone blades sharper than surgical steel all suggest advanced survival skills. Some sites show traces of fire pits lined with bone fragments, evidence that humans used every scrap of fuel in a treeless land. But the real gem of Beringia was its coastline. During the Ice Age, the continental shelf stretched far out, exposing tidal flats and shallow seas. These waters were rich in fish, shellfish, and seals. Marine resources provided vital omega-3 fatty acids and iodine, nutrients hard to find inland. Scientists believe coastal groups may have followed a kelp highway of resources along the Pacific Rim, eventually spreading south into the Americas. The climate of Beringia was unusual too. While the glaciers of North America and Siberia were brutal, Beringia itself was relatively dry and less icy. Mountains blocked much of the snowfall, creating a cold but stable grassland. This ice-free oasis offered shelter when other regions were locked in deep freeze. Botanists studying ancient pollen trapped in permafrost have found evidence of shrubs, grasses, and even hardy flowers that fed grazing animals, which in turn fed people. Cultural evidence suggests that Beringia wasn't just a survival zone, but a hub of innovation. Some of the oldest evidence of dog domestication comes from this region. Dogs weren't just pets. They pulled sleds, helped track prey, and guarded camps from predators. They were survival partners in a landscape where mobility and protection mattered. Light is another thing that is forgotten. Beringia had very harsh seasons because it was so high up. The summer days went on forever, and the winter nights were very long. This rhythm made life possible. In the summer, they could forage, fish, and hunt non-stop. But in the winter, they had to store food well and work together. Archaeologists think that seasonal meetings may have happened in the summer, when resources were plentiful and people could trade, get married, and tell stories that brought people together. Beringia also left a mark on our genes. Indigenous groups in the Americas today have DNA that has been modified to eat fat-rich foods, similar to how people in the far north relied heavily on mammoth meat, fish, and sea mammals. Inuit villages still eat a lot of fat and protein to stay warm in very cold weather years later. The plans were made in Beringia a very long time ago. Beringia is very interesting because it is no longer shown on maps because the sea has swallowed it up. Still, there are rivers, valleys, and fields under the water of the Bering Strait that are all that are left of a whole world that has been lost. Families used to build bone houses and follow caribou across grasslands. This wasn't a turning point for them. Before they made the long trip south, the first Americans grew up on a thriving subcontinent that they called home. Ice Age superhighways, trade and dogs. We think of asphalt roads and loud cars when we think of freeways. During the Ice Age, however, people built their own superhighways, hidden paths that moved people, things, information, and even animals over thousands of kilometers. These were not made of stone. To remember, sing, and trust them, they were carved. Obsidian and dogs were the most shocking things that linked these networks together. Archaeologists have traced obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than steel, moving over 2,000 kilometers in the Upper Paleolithic. A blade made in the Caucasus might show up hundreds of valleys away in Ukraine. This wasn't random scattering. It was a systematic movement along established trade paths. Obsidian's sharp edge made it prized for hunting weapons and butchery, but it was also beautiful, shimmering, glossy, and mysterious. A gift of obsidian was a statement of alliance, a portable bond between groups. Other materials tell the same story. Baltic amber traveled into Central Europe. Mediterranean shells appeared deep inland. Even exotic animal teeth, like fox and cave bear canines, circulated as ornaments. The spread of these items shows that Ice Age people didn't live in isolated camps. They were plugged into continent-wide exchange systems, with goods passing from band to band like a prehistoric relay race. How were these routes remembered without maps? Through songlines and stories. Anthropologists studying indigenous groups in Australia and the Arctic show that directions were sung into memory. A song might encode the order of rivers, mountains, or hunting grounds. By singing together, travelers could read the land like a moving map. Ice Age highways were not physical roads but shared cultural scripts guiding people across frozen plains. Enter the dog. The earliest confirmed dog remains, dating back about 15,000 years, come from sites in Siberia and Europe, right in the heart of these networks. Dogs weren't just companions, they were muscle. Sled-pulling dogs could haul meat, hides, and trade goods between camps. Hunting dogs helped track prey and protect families from wolves. Genetic studies suggest Ice Age dogs were already bred for stamina and cooperation, forming a partnership unique in the animal world. The domestication of dogs may have supercharged trade. Imagine a group traveling 100 kilometers with only human carriers. Now imagine the same group with sled dogs pulling loads across snow. Suddenly, alliances far away became reachable. Goods moved faster, networks grew denser, and information spread wider. Some researchers even argue that dogs were the first true vehicles of human history. What makes this picture richer is how trade wasn't only about objects. It was about marriages, rituals, and shared technology. A girl marrying into a distant band might carry her group's bead style or tool-making technique. A hunter might share a new way of hafting blades. Networks carried survival strategies as much as shiny stones. Archaeological evidence supports this. Innovations like the atlatl spread quickly across huge distances, too fast to be chance. Dogs played into this cultural web as symbols too. In Bonn-Oberkassel, Germany, a 14,000-year-old dog was buried with 2 humans, all sprinkled with red ochre. This was no discarded carcass. It was a respected member of the group, a sign that dogs were woven into social identity as well as survival. The dog's bones show signs of illness, yet it lived to old age, cared for despite being unable to work. That care was an investment in loyalty, a recognition of dogs as true kin. Trade networks also explain how distant groups avoided inbreeding. Seasonal gatherings where goods and dogs were exchanged doubled as marriage fairs. A necklace of amber might be both a trade item and a wedding gift. These exchanges tied groups into a safety web. If famine struck in one region, in-laws elsewhere might offer food or shelter. You can think of these roads as the arteries that bring life to the world during the Ice Age. Along them, obsidian, amber, shells, songs, and dogs all moved, connecting the different bands into a single human society. Getting through the Ice Age wasn't just about being alone. It was the connection that kept them alive. The amazing thing isn't that small groups were able to survive the cold. It's that they built safe roads across ice countries. Islands of survival, the refugee caves. During the last glacial maximum, most of northern Europe was frozen solid or covered under ice sheets, making it impossible to live there. Still, people lived. How? They did this by hiding in warmer areas of land that served as arks for people, plants, and animals. These were more than just rock caves. They were whole cultural islands that kept traditions and knowledge alive through the worst winters. The Iberian Peninsula, Italy, and the Balkans were 3 of the most important refugees. Archaeologists studying pollen records from ancient soils show that forests shrank everywhere else but remained in these regions. Oaks, pines, and edible plants survived here, while mammoths, horses, and deer clustered in valleys where food was still available. Humans followed, concentrating in these ecological sanctuaries. Altamira in Spain offers a glimpse of how rich these refuges became. Its cave walls are filled with polychrome paintings of bison, deer and wild boar, painted around 20,000 years ago, right when the outside world was at its coldest. These weren't idle doodles. Many scholars believe the art acted as survival calendars, encoding seasonal behaviors of animals. A painted pregnant deer might remind hunters when fawns would be born. A herd of bison charging might symbolize their spring migration. The cave became both a gallery and guidebook. Italy's refuges show another layer. In caves near Cavemen, researchers found ochre-stained tools and ornaments, including pierced shells painted with red pigment. The shells came from the Mediterranean coast, proof that even in isolation, groups maintained trade connections. These ornaments weren't luxuries. They were signals of identity and belonging, crucial when groups met after years apart. The Balkans, especially areas of modern-day Serbia and Bulgaria, hosted continuous human presence when other regions emptied out. Genetic studies suggest that much of today's European DNA traces back to these refugia. In a sense, everyone with European ancestry carries the legacy of these Ice Age shelters. They weren't temporary camps. They were cradles of continuity. Getting used to life in a refugia meant adapting. Archaeologists have found storage pits lined with bone and clay, which suggests that people piled up nuts and dried meat. Hearths have been burned over and over, showing that people have been coming back to the same places year after year. Some caves have layers of ash that are meters thick and were formed over hundreds of years of people living there. Imagine people from different eras sitting around the same fire ring and telling stories that reverberate off the walls. Spiritual life thrived too. In Chauvet Cave in France, though slightly north of the main refugia, lions and rhinos were painted with exquisite detail. These animals were vanishing from the landscape, but preserved in art. Scholars argue this was memory work, a way to keep knowledge alive even when ecosystems shifted. Within refugia, art served not only as expression, but as a library of disappearing worlds. A fact that is often forgotten is how refugia changed language. Linguists who study Europe's oldest languages, like Basque, think they may have come from places people lived during the Ice Age. Small groups in Iberia kept their own unique speech patterns alive when other groups died out or moved. These patterns have been around since ancient times. Basque doesn't have any known cousins, which may be a language echo of how people have survived by living alone. Refugia also preserved biodiversity. As the ice retreated, plants and animals from these pockets spread back into Europe, reseeding forests and grasslands. In this way, human survival was tied directly to ecological survival. By living in refugia, people not only saved themselves but also safeguarded the seeds of future ecosystems. Families during the Ice Age did more than just hide from the wind when they went into a cave in Iberia or Italy. It felt like walking into a stronghold for humans, where art, language, genes, and information were kept safe like treasures. Many people in Europe might not have survived without these islands of survival. When winter came back overnight, the Younger Dryas. The Earth seemed to be getting warmer about 12,900 years ago. Lands that had been frozen were losing their snow and ice, and getting plants to grow in places that had been frozen. The warming then stopped almost quickly from a geological point of view. It got as cold as 15 degrees Celsius in the northern hemisphere in just 10 years. The winters got harsh again. The Younger Dryas is the name for this sudden return to Ice Age conditions. For people, it was a shock that caused big changes. Scientists pieced together this story from Greenland ice cores, which trap ancient air in frozen bubbles. Layers show a sharp drop in temperature, along with changes in atmospheric dust and greenhouse gases. Pollen studies back this up. Forests retreated, tundra plants returned, and lakes froze over. It was as if nature flipped a switch, plunging humanity back into survival mode just as people thought they had escaped. People are still not sure what caused this cold spell. One popular theory says that melting ice sheets caused water to flood into the North Atlantic, which messed up the ocean currents that usually bring warmth north. Another controversial thought says that a comet hit Earth. Layers of microscopic spherules and nanodiamonds found in different parts of North America support this idea. No matter what caused it, the effects were felt all over the world: harder winters, droughts, and a new wave of species going extinct. For humans, the Younger Dryas was a turning point. In the Levant, groups known as the Natufians had begun gathering wild cereals, storing grain in stone houses, and experimenting with semi-settled life. When the cold returned, wild food supplies collapsed. Instead of abandoning the idea, they doubled down. They began deliberately planting seeds, protecting patches of useful plants, and controlling harvest cycles. Agriculture was born not from comfort, but from crisis. In Northern Europe, the sudden freeze forced people back into highly mobile lifestyles. Sites that showed signs of longer-term settlement were abandoned. Hunting became unpredictable again, so groups returned to seasonal migrations following reindeer and elk. Archaeological layers from this period often show abrupt changes in tool styles, suggesting people were retooling their survival strategies in response to shifting prey and landscapes. People neglected the effect on lakes and rivers. The water levels changed wildly because it was cooling down quickly. Wetlands grew or disappeared, and fish populations changed. People who counted on fishing had to quickly change. They either made new nets and hooks or moved to places where there were still lots of fish. It wasn't just about staying warm, it was also about keeping track of how whole ecosystems were suddenly shifting around. The Younger Dryas also reshaped human culture. At Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, the world's oldest known monumental temple was built during this very period. Hunter-gatherers hauled massive stone pillars into circles, carving animals into their surfaces. Many scholars believe the shock of climate change pushed people to seek new ways of uniting communities through ritual. If the environment could no longer be trusted, people turned to religion, ceremony, and social networks for stability. Genetic studies suggest population bottlenecks occurred during this time. Some groups dwindled or vanished, while others consolidated and spread. The survivors carried new cultural practices with them. In a way, the cold acted as a filter, stripping away weaker strategies and cementing innovations like farming, storage, and communal ritual as foundations of later civilization. It's worth remembering how fast this shift happened. A teenager born into a world of warming forests and expanding rivers could die in a landscape of snow and scarcity. Entire lifetimes unfolded under changing rules. The ability to adapt wasn't optional. It was the only path forward. About 11,700 years ago, the Younger Dryas ended just as quickly as it started. As the temperatures rose, the glaciers retreated again, and the Holocene, the warm period we are currently in, started. But people had been permanently changed. People started farming, building big buildings, and the population started to grow faster than ever. Because of the problem, people had to come up with new ideas, and those ideas made history. The megafauna extinction mystery. Some of the most interesting animals on Earth died at the end of the Ice Age. There were no more mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, or even camels in North America. Less than 3/4 of the species of big animals that weighed more than 45 kilograms were gone in just a few thousand years. The reason they went missing is still a secret to scientists. Overhunting, which is also sometimes called the Blitzkrieg hypothesis, is a common reason. As people moved to new regions, like the Americas and Australia, species seemed to go extinct. Archaeologists have found places where dozens of mammoths were killed, which shows that people hunted them in a planned way. In North America, spears with Clovis points on the end worked well against big game. Some experts think that people hunted giants faster than they could have babies. But climate change played a role too. Around 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age ended and ecosystems transformed. Grasslands that had supported herds of mammoth and bison shrank as forests expanded. Animals adapted to cold, dry plains suddenly found themselves in wetlands and dense woods. Studies of ancient DNA from mammoth bones reveal shrinking population sizes long before humans appeared in some regions. That means they were already vulnerable. Still, the timing seems odd. Mammoths lived in North America for hundreds of thousands of years, through many ice ages, until people came along. Giant marsupials like diprotodons went extinct in Australia not long after people started living there. A lot of experts think that the answer is not just climate change or people, but a dangerous mix of the two. The factor of fire is often disregarded. In Australia, charcoal layers show that people cleared land by setting it on fire and controlling it. This may have killed off the giant herbivores' food sources, which sped up their fall. In North America, hunters may have gone after older females of herds, which stopped them from having babies. Because breeding takes longer, even a small amount of hunting could push numbers over the edge. It is just as shocking that predators have disappeared. Deadly wolves, cave lions, and saber-toothed cats all disappeared at the same time. These groups of animals got their food from big eaters. When mammoth and bison groups broke up, predators went hungry. Just before they went extinct, saber-toothed cats' bodies have been found to be malnourished, with smaller bones and worn-out teeth. The death of megafauna sent shockwaves through ecosystems. When mammoths stopped walking on snow and cutting down trees, the Arctic became wetter, which made mosses and bushes grow instead of grasses. Because of this change in the environment, there was even less land for feeding cows. People didn't just kill animals. By removing core species, they broke down whole ecosystems. But the story isn't all loss. Some species survived against the odds. Reindeer, muskoxen, and bison made it through, perhaps because they reproduced faster or had more flexible diets. Horses went extinct in North America but survived in Eurasia, later returning with Spanish explorers thousands of years later. These survivors remind us that extinction isn't only about weakness. It's about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another hidden chapter lies on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean. Isolated populations of mammoths survived there until just 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids of Egypt were built. Genetic studies show these mammoths suffered from inbreeding and genetic defects, like deformed skeletons and brittle tusks, before they finally disappeared. They were the last flicker of a vanished world. The extinction mystery matters because it reshaped human survival too. Losing giant prey forced people to rely more heavily on reindeer, fish, and plants. It pushed communities toward experimentation with farming, storage, and domestic animals. In a sense, the end of the mammoths pushed humanity toward the beginning of civilization. So why did the giants die? Most scientists now agree it wasn't a single cause. Climate change weakened ecosystems. Humans added new hunting pressures, and cascading effects like habitat shifts and fire finished the job. The Ice Age closed not with a single catastrophe, but with a chain of smaller blows that together toppled the giants. Knowledge in paint and song. Most people think of beautiful Ice Age cave art when they see bison running along stone walls, horses with red ochre lines around them, and mammoths cut out of ivory. But new study shows that these works weren't just for looks. They were ways to store information. Before writing, art and music were the main ways that people passed down information. Song and paint were the books of the Ice Age. Take the famous Lascaux Cave in France. The walls show animals in extraordinary detail. Horses with winter coats, bulls in spring rut, deer shedding antlers. Archaeologists realized these weren't random portraits. They were calendars. By painting animals in seasonal states, Ice Age people created visual reminders of migration patterns and breeding cycles. Hunters could read the walls as guides to when herds would arrive, when fish would spawn, and when resources would peak. Another overlooked detail is repetition. Some caves show the same animal painted dozens of times in slightly different forms. Far from wasteful, this may have been mnemonic, a way to memorize sequences. Modern cognitive science suggests repeating visual symbols strengthens memory, especially in oral cultures. These walls were not art galleries, but survival manuals written in color and line. Symbols make things more intricate. Along with lions and mammoths, experts found dots, lines, and hand drawings in Chauvet Cave. Archaeologist Genevieve von Petzinger's recent research shows that these marks were part of a set of symbols that were used all over Europe during the Ice Age. A curve here and a circle there, over and over again in places that are thousands of kilometers apart. They might have used them as a form of writing, long before alphabets to store ideas like water, danger, or migration. Music carried equal weight. Flutes carved from vulture bones and mammoth ivory, some 40,000 years old, were tuned to pentatonic scales still used in folk music today. This suggests songs weren't random noise. They followed patterns that could be remembered and passed down. Songlines likely acted as spoken maps. By singing verses tied to landmarks, rivers, or stars, travelers could navigate vast distances without a written chart. Rhythm mattered too. Drums made from stretched hides, rattles of bone and teeth, and resonant stalactites inside caves created soundscapes where groups shared stories. Modern hunter-gatherers often embed ecological knowledge in song, verses about where waterholes lie, which plants cure illness, or how animals behave in certain seasons. Ice Age music may have functioned the same way, a melodic encyclopedia echoing off cave walls. Storytelling around fire carried this knowledge further. Myths, repeated across generations, likely contained coded warnings. A tale about a monster in a valley might really mean avoid hunting here in winter. A story about an immortal bird might symbolize migration cycles. Oral traditions blur entertainment and instruction. For Ice Age bands, the line didn't exist. Story was survival. Burials confirmed the role of art as knowledge. At Sungir in Russia, 2 children were buried with over 10,000 ivory beads and a carved staff decorated with geometric patterns. These were not just trinkets. They were teaching tools, visual cues that embodied cultural memory. Each bead may have symbolized a lesson or a connection, like pages in a book. Even acoustics shaped knowledge. Some caves with art also have extraordinary sound qualities. Clap your hands in certain chambers of Lascaux, and echoes mimic the hoofbeats of animals painted on the walls. Scholars suggest rituals combining sound and image, turning caves into immersive theaters of learning. Children growing up inside these spaces weren't just looking at pictures, they were experiencing lessons with all senses. The survival value of this system is clear. Without writing, how else could groups remember when reindeer migrated, which herbs cured fever, or how to find obsidian 2 valleys away? Paintings fixed the memory in place. Songs carried it across distances. Together, they created a portable and permanent way of keeping the past alive. The long goodbye from ice to agriculture. A little over 11,700 years ago, the Ice Age finally ended. The change wasn't sudden like a switch being flipped. It was a long goodbye, a slow, uneven thaw that changed people, animals, and the land. It was no longer necessary to chase herds across frozen fields to stay alive. It meant getting used to a new world with woods, swamps, and ultimately fields of crops. As glaciers retreated, sea levels rose by over 120 meters, swallowing entire landscapes. Places that had been hunting grounds became coastlines. The English Channel flooded, cutting Britain off from Europe. Vast plains like Doggerland in the North Sea vanished underwater, taking villages and migration routes with them. For Ice Age people, the world literally shrank, forcing communities to reorganize. Forests spread quickly. Where mammoths and reindeer once roamed open steppe, oak, hazel, and birch filled the land. Big grazing animals retreated north or died out, leaving hunters without their staple prey. Archaeological sites show diets shifting from reindeer and horse to wild boar, red deer, fish, and nuts. Grinding stones, once rare, became common as people processed acorns and grains into flour. Slowly, meat lost its dominance on the menu. Wetlands also expanded. At Starcar in England, a famous Mesolithic site, people built wooden platforms on marshy ground. They lived by lakes filled with fish and reeds, hunting red deer that gathered at the water's edge. The site preserves headdresses made from deer skulls, used for ritual or camouflage. It shows how quickly humans retooled their strategies to suit the new environment. Storage was the most important new idea of this time. People began to line grain, nuts, and dried fish with clay or bark to keep them safe from animals and water as their food sources changed. With this store, people could stay in one place for longer. Instead of chasing large herds, groups went around smaller areas and stayed at the same camps year after year. It's true that the seeds of settlement were planted. In the Near East, these changes gave rise to something revolutionary. Groups like the Natufians had long gathered wild barley and wheat. During the Younger Dryas, they began replanting seeds deliberately. By the time the climate warmed again, cultivation had taken hold. Small villages with permanent stone houses appeared, like Jericho. Farming was not a sudden invention, but the culmination of generations adapting to climate shocks. Art and ritual changed too. In Turkey, at Göbekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers built massive stone circles decorated with carved animals around 11,500 years ago. These weren't homes, but ceremonial centers, likely used by multiple groups gathering to share food, ritual, and alliances. The scale suggests that as resources stabilized, people could invest energy in shared monuments. Cooperation turned into culture on a new scale. Domestication followed. Dogs, already companions in the Ice Age, became even more central, guarding herds and helping hunt in forests. Goats and sheep were tamed soon after. What began as opportunistic hunting shifted into herd management. Instead of chasing animals, humans began reshaping their behavior. This control over plants and animals marked a fundamental break from the world of their Ice Age ancestors. The emotional world shifted as well. Burial sites show fewer ivory beads and mammoth bone ornaments, symbols tied to the old steppe world. Instead, new objects appear: carved axes, polished stone tools, and figurines linked to fertility. This reflects a change in worldview, from honoring the hunt to honoring growth, reproduction, and permanence. But the transition was not easy. Farming meant more food, but also more work and new risks. Crops failed in droughts, and crowded settlements bred disease. Some scholars call agriculture the trap of history. Necessary, but costly. Yet once populations grew, there was no going back. Hunting alone could no longer sustain villages of hundreds. The Ice Age wasn't just a frozen struggle. It was the chapter where humanity proved its genius. From sewing needles that unlocked the Arctic, to bone-built homes that defied the cold, to alliances that carried love and knowledge across continents, our ancestors didn't just survive, they thrived. And their resilience still echoes in us today. If you enjoyed this journey into their hidden world, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because there are countless more untold stories of our past waiting to be uncovered.